Generation 8 Zacian is one of the most obviously overpowered things to have ever existed. In a metagame with Calyrex Shadow, Dracovish, and Xerneas, it was still too powerful for the Gen 8 Ubers tier, even without its more powerful crown form. With its incredible combination of traits, it was a force only Quagsire could withstand. But when it came to Gen 9, it brought a series of nerfs, and was no longer broken. Its once overpowered hero of many battles form would find a home in the Ubers UU tier, but if a threat large enough to be banned to anything goes, the same as the likes of Mega Rayquaza only one generation ago, how the heck could it remain? Well, for an answer, you're going to want to keep watching. If you like this kind of content, liking and subscribing is the best way to show it, as well as a comment on what you enjoyed the most. But without further ado, let's get into an analysis of Zacian and how it fits in the Ubers UU tier. Zacian, along with many other Pokemon, would be made available for use with the home release on May 30th. However, the Ubers UU tier wouldn't be created until October, but when it was created, Zacian would prove to be a very, very strong mon. To understand what makes it so powerful, I'll first give comparisons to explain how good its stats are. Factoring in its ability, it becomes stronger than Mega Rayquaza. Its bulk surpasses defensive wolves like Heatran and Magearna, and as for speed, it outruns Iron Bundle on the legendary bikes. Well then, what's its weakness? Is it its typing, like maybe Tyranitar? Nope. It's got Fairy, one of the best types in the game, especially if you're wanting to be an offensive Pokemon. Well, what about move pool? Regieleki and Spectrier have that problem, so does Zacian have it too? Well, it has access to wide coverage, a strong stab move in Play Rough, and access to Sword Stance. Yeah, also just Trailblaze in case you wanted speed. So, in short, nope, it doesn't have that problem whatsoever. Not really even 4 move slots in Drill like a Pokemon like Mewtwo. Now you're probably thinking, geez, this sounds a bit insane, and that's because it kind of is. So let's look at what can be used to beat this pink dog. The first thing we must know to understand what it does and how to beat it is how it uses its stats. The first and most common set is a Sword Stance Sweeper. With Intrepid Sword and Sword Stance, it can get to +3 with only one turn on the field. And with its bulk and speed, it can find a way to boost up in pretty much any game. Hazards like sticky webs usually aren't even an issue for this set, as the most common item is heavy duty boots. After using Sword Dance, the combination of Play Rough, Close Combat, and Terrablast Ground or Fire could threaten to end a game quite quickly depending on matchup. The second and less common set is Choice Band. With Terra Fairy Play Rough, Choice Band, and Intrepid Sword, it could do massive stat damage to anything that's not resist, and even against resists, it could do some nice damage. After the initial switch-in, it does drop in power, but it still remains threatening with its decent base 120 attack and high speed. These sets usually use moves like Crunch, Wild Charge, or Psychic Fangs as coverage, although they could drop Fairy type damage and keep Terrablast Ground or Fire to create more powerful offensive type coverage combos and be more threatening to Fairy switching. When Ubers UU was created, the only good straight up hard counter to Zacian was Dondozo, and that generally remains to be the case today. Because of Zacian's nature as a boost sweeper, Unaware is a perfect ability for a counter to have. But Dondozo goes even further, with massive defensive stats and the great typing of Mono Water, which Zacian can't hit super effectively with common coverage. Dondozo is an amazing shutdown to Zacian. However, Dondozo is of course quite passive. Can't really do much except a bit of damage to Zacian, and if Zacian switched out, Dondozo could be punished easily, as it doesn't have any pivoting or much offensive pressure unless you're weak to its attacks. However, this was fine. Without Zacian's boost, it becomes much weaker, going from a massive attack stat to a decent but unimpressive one. Not every team wanted to run Dondozo though, and it stayed pretty much locked to stall. You didn't need Dondozo though. There were other ways to beat Zacian, just not as consistently as Dondozo. These methods were primarily focused around revenge killing Zacian or phasing it out before it could set up through the use of positioning and some good play, and maybe a good defensive Terra. These wouldn't completely stop Zacian, but wouldn't minimize its impact in a game. Something that must be understood about Zacian is that its most important aspect is its boosting. If you can prevent its boosting, then you can prevent the Zacian from making too much of an impact on the game. And the best way to prevent boosting is forcing the Zacian to switch. This can be done through moves like Whirlwind, which forcibly cause a switch, walling it in a way that prevents it from making progress even if it is boosted, or by threatening to KO Zacian, are both methods that incentivize switching instead of straight up forcing a switch. While Dondozo is a pretty great wall and will beat pretty much any Zacian set aside from Terra Electric Wild Charge or some crazy stuff like that, Dondozo isn't the only defensive counterplay. Skarmory and Corviknight, while lesser seen now, could beat Zacian if it was running Terrablast Ground instead of Fire, and use an Iron Press set to 1v1 the Zacian. Toxapex, on the other hand, beat Zacian if it's Terrablast Fire. Toxic Spikes is a very strong wall to those sets, as you resist all of Zacian's moves, can use Haze to reset stat boosts, and are racking up Toxic, Rocky Helmet, and Surf Chip to quickly wear down an opponent's Zacian, as well as having Regenerator and Recover to keep healthy. On the topic of regenerated water types, Alamomola can beat a Zacian that's not too boosted. However, it does find itself in a sticky situation if it doesn't burn with Scald fast enough, since a Sword Stance and Intrepid Sword boosted player up does do a KO. If you do get a burn though, Zacian can be dealt with fairly easily. There's also Lander's Therian, whose Intimidate counteracts Intrepid Sword, and with max defense and HP investment paired with the Rocky Helmet, Lander's Therian can serve as a pseudo-check to Zacian, a bit like Alamomola. Necrozma also can do decently against Zacian with defense investment. If you want to learn more about Necrozma and UUbers UU in general though, I do have a video on that if you want to check it out. And an honorable mention, Crocalor could also, believe it or not, beat some Zacian sets. With its evolution, Skeledirge beating Zacian Crowned in UUbers, Crocalor found a little bit of meme usage in the early periods of UUbers UU, ultimately ending up with Cutiefly in the same rank as Dialga, Origin, and Darkrai. As you can imagine, that created a lot of memes. Of course, Terrablast Ground did threaten Crocalor, but if I remember correctly, most sets ran Terra Fire anyways, and Terra Fairy from Crocalor did also work. If it's Terra Ground, Crocalor could also Will-O-Wisp the Zacian. Crocalor, of course, hasn't been talked in a while now, and since we have much better defensive options, it's not a surprise that nobody talks about it anymore. Now, moving on to more offensive ways to beat Zacian. Palafin is a pretty good one to start out with, I think. Since Zacians mostly run Terra Ground or Fire, Palafin can take advantage of the Terra and hit Zacian with a super effective Jet Punch. Even if Zacian didn't use Terra, Jet Punch could finish off the damage Zacian, and the range at which it would kill was increased by Terra Water. Scarfers are also another option to threaten Zacian out. Chi-Yu and Landorus are probably the best and most common ones. With Overheat and Sludge Wave / Earth Power, respectively, they could both threaten large amounts of damage against Zacian. Most other decently powerful Scarfers could also be good to revenge kill Zacian, although some may need a bit of chip. Naturally faster Mons like Deoxys could also work. The point is, while you may have to give up a Mon or take some damage, you can force Zacian out, and if you do, the dog becomes much easier to deal with defensively. Now, these checks are all well and good, but remember those defensive ones? What if the UUbers players suddenly decided to, I don't know, use a bunch of Dondozo, and some Corviknight, and even some Giratina too, the altered form by the way, just in case you thought you could use a defensive Terra on that for Zacian? Well, that's what happened in November. For 1 month, much of the best defensive counterplay to Zacian rose up to UUbers, and people were seriously considering a ban. This was before Skarmy and Dawnwings and all those other Indigo Discmons, by the way. The council turned to the Tierg survey, which showed Zacian at 3.4 out of 5. But because Zacian was under 3.5, even if just barely, the council voted on whether or not Zacian should be suspected. And after that, Zacian lovers could breathe a sigh of relief as Zacian wasn't banned or even suspected. And in December, Corviknight, Dondozo, and Giratina dropped in usage and came back to UUbers UU. After that, people agreed and recognized that Zacian was balanced and healthy. It stayed high in usage to this day, hovering at around 40% and dropping to 30% during its weaker months. It's in the S- tier today too, so its usage does reflect its viability pretty well. Additionally, on the last survey, the qualified players rated Zacian 1.84 brokenness out of 10. I personally really like using Zacian. It's a mon that's good without skill and incredible with it. It's been a staple from the start, and unlike a horse with a gambling addiction I might know, it doesn't seem to be in any danger of falling out of the meta. So on that note, let's end the analysis. If you like this video and want to see more, you know what buttons to press. And if you have feedback or suggestions, put it all in the comments. With that out of the way, bye.